Hey guys, tonight we will explore the chapter 2 of Ancient Travel. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in tonight, comment your location and local time. It's always strangely comforting seeing sleepy travelers from all over the world gathering together in the dark. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Chapter 2. Carts that shake your bones. Ancient wagons turn every road into a slow torture machine. You continue walking because ancient roads do not care whether you are tired. The road simply keeps existing in front of you with the quiet confidence of something that has ruined countless lives before yours. By now, the romantic fantasy of journeying across the ancient world has faded completely. There are no cinematic orchestras swelling in the background, no inspiring speeches, mostly just sore legs and the growing suspicion that every civilization in history secretly hated travelers. The sun climbs higher and heat begins pressing down against your shoulders. Your bag somehow feels heavier than yesterday, despite the fact you already ate half of your food. This is one of the strange laws of travel. Supplies become lighter, but suffering becomes heavier. Ahead of you, a wooden wagon rattles violently across the road. At first glance, it looks useful, maybe even comfortable. Then you get closer. The wagon bounces so aggressively over stones and holes that the passengers inside appear to be experiencing spiritual punishment. Every wheel rotation produces a new noise: creaking wood, strained leather, metal rattling against metal. Somewhere beneath the cargo, something lets out a squeal that sounds deeply concerned about the entire situation. You briefly consider whether walking might actually be the better option after all. Unfortunately, many travelers throughout history faced exactly this decision. Wagons could carry heavy supplies, but roads were often so uneven that riding inside them became physically exhausting. Ancient suspension systems did not exist unless you count hoping for the best as engineering. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that most premodern roads were poorly maintained outside major trade routes. Even famous roads, like parts of the Roman network, could become rough, muddy, or damaged over time, especially in bad weather or politically unstable regions. And weather is becoming your enemy again. Dark clouds slowly gather overhead while the wagon ahead of you sinks partially into a muddy depression. Several travelers climb down immediately because apparently even they no longer trust the cart. The driver shouts at the horses with the exhausted energy of a man who has repeated the same argument with animals for 15 consecutive years. The horses remain emotionally unmoved. You step aside as one wheel slips deeper into mud. Everyone begins pushing together. Boots sink into wet earth. Cloaks become splattered brown almost instantly. One traveler loses a shoe entirely and stares at the mud with the hollow expression of someone reconsidering every life choice that led here. Oddly enough, ancient travelers constantly lost shoes. Historians have found records of worn-out footwear abandoned along roads, especially in difficult terrain. Sandals broke, leather rotted, straps snapped unexpectedly. Imagine walking 20 miles only for your shoe to suddenly decide it has completed its contractual obligations. Eventually, the wagon lurches free with a violent cracking sound that does not inspire confidence. Nobody celebrates. Everyone simply resumes suffering. You continue alongside the caravan for safety. Traveling alone is dangerous, especially in isolated regions. Groups offer protection, shared supplies, and occasionally someone to complain with. Human beings have always bonded through collective misery. The road narrows as forest thickens around you. Tall trees block sunlight, leaving long shadows stretching across the path. The wagon wheels carve deep grooves in damp earth, while insects buzz endlessly through humid air. One strange detail about ancient travel is how loud nature could feel before industrial noise existed. Birds, insects, rustling leaves, distant animal calls. Travelers often described forests as unnervingly alive. Without engines, phones, or city sounds, every noise carried meaning. And some sounds are worrying. A branch snaps somewhere deeper in the trees. Conversation stops immediately. Everyone looks toward the forest. Nothing appears. Still, the atmosphere changes. Travelers pull cloaks tighter. One merchant quietly grips a knife beneath his coat. Another mutters a prayer under his breath. Because bandits love roads like this. Scholars still argue whether medieval roads were truly overrun with robbers as often as stories suggest, because surviving accounts sometimes exaggerated dangers for dramatic effect. But isolated theft absolutely happened, especially near forests, mountain passes, and unstable political borders.
And honestly, this road feels like exactly the kind of place where bad decisions happen. The caravan begins moving faster. Not dramatically faster, unfortunately. Ancient wagons possess the speed of emotionally exhausted furniture, but the intention is there. Rain finally arrives in cold, uneven drops. The forest floor turns slick almost immediately. Wet leaves cling to boots. Wagon wheels spray mud across everyone nearby. Your cloak absorbs water with impressive efficiency, becoming heavier minute by minute. Within an hour, everything smells damp. Wet wood, wet animals, wet clothing, wet humans. You discover there are far too many categories of wetness in the ancient world. As evening approaches, the caravan stops beside a narrow stream cutting through the trees. Travelers begin unloading supplies while horses drink noisily from shallow water. Someone struggles to light a fire using damp wood and pure stubbornness. You sit on a fallen log and remove your shoes carefully. Your feet look terrible. Blisters swell along your heels. Red marks cover your ankles. Tiny cuts sting sharply when exposed to air. And tomorrow, somehow, you will continue walking anyway. That becomes another hidden reality of ancient travel. Stopping completely is often worse than continuing. Supplies run low, weather changes, roads become dangerous after dark. So travelers keep moving even while injured, exhausted, or sick. Nearby, a merchant opens a small wooden box filled with strange powders and herbs. Medieval travelers frequently carried basic remedies during long journeys. Honey for wounds, garlic for illness, vinegar mixtures for infections. Some remedies genuinely helped. Others probably just traumatized people in more creative ways. Dinner tonight consists of coarse bread hardened nearly into weapon-grade material, watered ale, and thin stew containing something that used to be meat at some point in recorded history. Nobody complains, mostly because everyone is too tired. Darkness settles slowly through the forest canopy while sparks drift upward from the fire. One traveler begins quietly singing an old road song. Another sharpens a knife beside the wagon wheel. Somewhere nearby, horses shift nervously in the dark. You stare into the flames and realize something unsettling. You are adapting. The mud no longer shocks you. The cold feels normal. The constant discomfort has become background noise. Ancient travel slowly reshapes your expectations until survival itself begins feeling strangely routine. And tomorrow, the road will ask even more from you.
Chapter 3. Sleeping Beside Strangers. Inns, fleas, noise, and suspicious travelers ruin every night. Morning arrives without kindness. Cold air settles across the campsite while pale gray light leaks slowly through the trees. The fire from last night has collapsed into weak glowing embers surrounded by damp ash. Nearby travelers rise silently from blankets that did absolutely nothing to help their backs. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a bird produces an aggressively cheerful sound that feels personally insulting, considering your current condition. You sit up carefully. Every part of your body protests. Your shoulders ache from carrying supplies. Your neck feels twisted at an angle nature probably did not intend. Your legs have somehow become both stiff and exhausted simultaneously, which seems unfair but historically accurate. Around you, the caravan slowly prepares for another day of suffering disguised as transportation. One traveler tightens leather straps around crates filled with trade goods. Another attempts to dry soaked clothing beside the dying fire. A merchant squints suspiciously at bread that now possesses the structural integrity of roofing material. Nobody looks rested. And yet, everyone continues. That becomes one of the strangest psychological realities of ancient travel. Human beings adapt with disturbing efficiency. Conditions that would trigger modern online complaints, emergency refunds, and strongly worded customer reviews simply become normal daily existence. You pull your boots back on. This is a mistake. The leather feels cold and damp against swollen feet. One blister immediately reopens with the emotional enthusiasm of a medieval tax collector. For a brief moment, you consider remaining beside the road forever and allowing nature to reclaim you peacefully. Unfortunately, breakfast is already happening. A large iron pot hangs above the weak morning fire while someone stirs thin porridge using what appears to be a stick found moments earlier on the ground. Steam rises slowly into cold air, carrying the deeply unexciting smell of wet grain. Oddly enough, historians often mention how repetitive ancient travel food could become. Bread, grain, salted meat, weak stew, dried beans, repeat until emotionally numb. Fresh food spoiled quickly during long journeys unless you traveled with significant wealth. Ordinary travelers survived on durable ingredients that could tolerate weather, rough handling, and questionable storage conditions. Flavor was more of an occasional surprise than an expectation. You accept a wooden bowl of porridge anyway because your body no longer cares about dignity. Nearby, several merchants discuss routes ahead in low, serious voices. One route passes through marshland flooded by recent rain. Another cuts through rocky hills where wagon wheels frequently break. A third path is technically safer, but adds several extra days of walking. Ancient travelers constantly made decisions like this. Not which route has better scenery, more like which road gives us the lowest probability of dying awkwardly in mud. Scholars still argue whether pre-modern people perceive travel distances differently than modern humans, because psychological experience mattered enormously before mechanized transportation. A journey of 50 miles could feel emotionally massive when every mile demanded physical effort and uncertainty. And honestly, after only a few days out here, you understand completely. The caravan finally begins moving again. Wheels groan, horses snort impatiently, wet leather creaks beneath heavy cargo. The forest road stretches ahead in endless shades of brown and gray. Rain from yesterday has transformed the path into a masterpiece of suffering.
Mud grips your boots with every step. Wagon wheels sink deep into soft earth, leaving trenches large enough to concern future archaeologists. Several travelers walk beside the road itself because the center path has become nearly impassable. Then the smell arrives: swamp water, rotting plants, wet animals. Ancient roads had many fragrances, and almost all of them felt deeply committed to the concept of discomfort. Ahead, the trees thin slightly as the caravan approaches a small wooden bridge crossing dark, sluggish water. The bridge looks old enough to contain historical regrets. Everyone slows immediately. One horse refuses to cross. Reasonable decision, honestly. The driver pulls the reins while muttering increasingly creative insults toward the animal. The horse remains spiritually committed to resistance. Eventually, several travelers help guide it across, while the wooden bridge groans beneath wagon weight with sounds that strongly suggest structural disagreement. A quirky historical detail often forgotten is how dangerous bridges could be before modern engineering standards. Travelers regularly encountered collapsing wood, flood damage, unstable crossings, or ferrymen charging ridiculous prices during bad weather. And falling into medieval river water was not an experience anyone wanted. You cross carefully while staring at the dark current beneath the planks. Broken branches drift silently downstream beside patches of brown foam. Somewhere nearby, frogs croak with suspicious confidence. On the opposite side of the bridge, the road climbs uphill through rocky terrain. This somehow feels worse. Loose stones slide beneath your boots, while wagons struggle painfully against gravity. Travelers lean forward while walking, as if physically negotiating with the hill itself. Horses breathe heavily. One wheel strikes a rock hard enough to send cargo tumbling sideways. A merchant screams something unrepeatable about pottery. Another strange reality of ancient travel becomes clear very quickly. Almost everything breaks eventually. Wheels crack, bags tear, rope snaps, containers leak. Weather destroys supplies with slow, relentless patience. Entire journeys could unravel because one important object failed at the wrong moment. You begin checking your own belongings constantly. Water pouch, still attached. Blanket, mostly dry. Food bag, slightly crushed but alive. Emotional stability, rapidly deteriorating. By afternoon, clouds finally part enough for weak sunlight to filter across the hills. Steam rises from damp cloaks, while insects return with terrifying enthusiasm. Travelers spread briefly across the roadside to rest sore legs and eat another deeply discouraging meal. You sit beside a stone marker worn nearly smooth by time. Nobody knows exactly who placed it there anymore. Ancient roads often contained mysterious markers, shrines, carvings, or ruins left behind by older civilizations. Travelers moved through landscapes layered with forgotten history, superstition, and abandoned structures whose original meanings slowly disappeared over centuries. That uncertainty made roads feel strangely haunted. A ruined watchtower appears in the distance, overlooking the hills ahead. Half-collapsed walls lean against one another, while vines crawl across cracked stone. One traveler quietly makes a protective gesture toward it before continuing forward. Nobody asks questions. The road bends onward, always onward. And somewhere ahead, beyond the hills and forests and mud and exhaustion, another miserable night of ancient travel waits patiently for you. Chapter 4. The Smell of Ancient Travel. Sweat, animals, mud, and human waste follow you everywhere. By late evening, the road finally delivers you to what passes for civilization. Unfortunately, civilization smells worse than the forest. The inn appears through fog and drizzle, like a tired apology from humanity itself. A crooked wooden building leans slightly sideways beside the road, as though even the structure regrets being here. Dim orange light flickers through warped shutters. Smoke leaks unevenly from the chimney. Outside, several exhausted horses stand tied beside a water trough containing liquid of deeply questionable character. Still, after days on the road, the sight feels almost magical. Shelter, warmth, possibly soup. You approach with the caravan while mud clings stubbornly to your boots. The innkeeper notices you immediately and responds with the emotional warmth of a tax collector spotting unpaid debts. Ancient inns rarely operated on modern hospitality standards. There are no smiling greetings, no complimentary towels, no little mint placed lovingly on your pillow by someone who wishes you emotional peace. Mostly, there is suspicion. Travelers are dirty, unpredictable, occasionally violent, and often unable to pay properly. Innkeepers know this. Travelers know this. Everyone enters negotiations already slightly annoyed with one another. Inside, the common room glows dimly beneath smoky lantern light. The air feels thick. Wet wool, sweat, ale, smoke, cooked onions, and underneath everything else, the unmistakable scent of too many humans sharing too little space for too many years. A large fire crackles near the center of the room, while travelers crowd around rough wooden tables. Merchants argue softly over prices. Pilgrims warm stiff hands beside flames. One exhausted man sleeps sitting upright with his forehead pressed directly against a drinking cup, which honestly feels like a reasonable strategy at this point.
A dog wanders beneath tables searching for scraps. Several chickens wander freely with complete confidence. Nobody questions this. You quickly learn another reality of ancient travel. Animals are basically roommates now. Horses outside, dogs inside, chickens everywhere, fleas acting as unofficial management staff. You find a narrow space along one table, while the innkeeper slams down bowls of stew possessing a color not commonly associated with optimism. Floating somewhere inside the broth is a suspicious chunk of meat that could belong to almost anything with legs. You decide not to investigate. A mainstream historical fact often forgotten is that medieval and ancient inns varied enormously depending on region, wealth, and trade importance. Large cities sometimes offered surprisingly comfortable accommodations for wealthy merchants, while isolated roadside inns could become overcrowded, filthy, and dangerous. And this place definitely belongs closer to this second category. Rain pounds softly against the roof while travelers continue arriving from the darkness outside. Cloaks drip water across wooden floors already damaged by decades of boots, spilled ale, and probably several knife fights. Near the fire, two merchants begin arguing loudly about missing coins. Nobody looks surprised. One traveler quietly moves his belongings closer to his chest.
Another checks whether his knife remains accessible beneath the table, because trust disappears quickly on ancient roads. Scholars still argue whether travelers and pre-modern inns genuinely feared strangers constantly, or whether surviving written accounts exaggerated danger for dramatic storytelling. But theft absolutely remained common enough that travelers frequently slept beside their possessions, which becomes your problem very soon. The innkeeper finally leads several travelers upstairs toward the sleeping rooms. Calling them rooms feels generous. What actually awaits you is a long, crowded chamber filled with rough straw mattresses arranged side by side with all the privacy of a military disaster. Blankets lie in tangled heaps. Candles flicker weakly against stained wooden walls. Somewhere in the darkness, somebody coughs with alarming dedication. You stare silently at the sleeping arrangement. The innkeeper stares back silently. This conversation somehow ends with you paying anyway. You lower yourself carefully onto one mattress while every sore muscle in your body complains immediately. The straw beneath the blanket crackles loudly each time you move. Something tiny jumps near your wrist. You choose emotional denial. A quirky historical detail historians often mention is how common bed sharing became in inns throughout history. Travelers frequently slept beside complete strangers simply because space remained limited and expensive. Privacy, personal boundaries, and peaceful silence were luxuries many ordinary travelers never expected. And peaceful silence definitely does not exist tonight. One man snores with astonishing power. Another mutters continuously in his sleep like he is negotiating with invisible spirits. Somewhere nearby, boots hit the floor as someone stumbles toward a camber pot with very little coordination and absolutely no dignity. You close your eyes anyway because exhaustion outweighs fear.
For a while, sleep almost arrives. Then, the itching begins. Tiny bites along your ankle, then your arm, then somewhere behind your neck. You sit upright instantly. The mattress is alive. Not dramatically alive, thankfully, but active enough to deeply concern you. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs represented constant companions throughout much of human history, especially in crowded inns, ships, military camps, and poor households.
Travelers carried pests between towns so efficiently that ancient roads probably functioned as enormous insect transportation systems. Honestly, civilization may have peaked once humans invented proper laundry machines. Across the room, another traveler scratches furiously beneath his blanket while muttering tired curses. Nobody reacts. This problem clearly stopped being surprising centuries ago. Outside, thunder rolls softly through the night. Rainwater taps against warped shutters, while cold wind slips through cracks in the walls. Candles flicker weakly. Shadows stretch strangely across the ceiling beams overhead. Then suddenly, a scream downstairs. Everyone wakes immediately. Several travelers sit upright. One grabs a knife. Another grabs the wrong boot and seems deeply confused by the situation. Below you, angry voices echo through the common room. Something crashes. A chair perhaps, or a person. Hard to know. You creep quietly toward the stairwell beside several equally exhausted strangers. Downstairs, two merchants stand shouting beside overturned benches while the innkeeper attempts to separate them using the universal medieval conflict resolution strategy of yelling even louder. Apparently, somebody accused somebody else of cheating during dice games. Ancient inns loved gambling almost as much as they loved disease. Travelers spent long evenings drinking, betting, sharing stories, and occasionally ruining each other's lives over small piles of coins. Roadside inns became strange temporary worlds where merchants, pilgrims, criminals, soldiers, and wanderers all collided beneath one leaking roof. Eventually, the argument settles into bitter muttering. Nobody dies, which honestly counts as a successful evening by ancient travel standards. You return upstairs while rain continues falling beyond the shutters. The mattress still itches.
The room still smells terrible. And somewhere beside you, a stranger begins snoring again with renewed spiritual commitment. Morning will arrive too soon, and the road will still be waiting.